Christmas Eve had a quiet way of slipping into the small Ohio town, wrapping the streets in a soft glow of holiday lights and a hush that made every sound, the crackle of a fireplace, the distant bark of a dog, the crunch of snow under boots, feel magnified. Officer Daniel Reeves had been on the night shift for nearly 3 hours, his patrol car rolling slowly down empty streets, fog of breath curling in the cold air. The radio was silent, for which he was grateful. Most people were home with their families, and tonight, he hoped, nothing bad would happen. But that peace was about to shatter. A crackle burst through the radio, snapping Daniel to attention. Possible disturbance near abandoned farmhouse on Maplewood Road, requesting immediate check. His stomach sank. The town had a few abandoned properties, old farmhouses left to rot under years of neglect, most of them forgotten. Officers usually avoided them unless absolutely necessary. And Christmas Eve, nobody wanted to risk being out here tonight. Beside him, Rex, his K9 partner, perked up sharply, ears twitching at the tone in the radio. Rex was a Belgian Malinois trained for search and rescue, patrol, and protection. But he also had a sense about people, a sixth sense that Daniel had learned to trust over the years. Tonight, Rex's hackles rose, his gaze fixed toward the horizon. Something was wrong. Daniel felt it too, deep in his chest, a pit of worry, cold and heavy, as if the night itself had turned hostile. The farmhouse appeared at the end of Maplewood Road, half hidden by snow and darkness. The windows were shattered, boards hung loose on the walls, and a faded wreath clung stubbornly to the crooked door. Daniel parked, the tires crunching in fresh snow. He stepped out, pulling his coat tighter, flashlight in one hand, leash in the other. Rex immediately strained forward, low growl rumbling in his chest, the kind that made Daniel pause. "Easy, Rex. Let's see what we're dealing with," Daniel murmured, though his own heart raced. The wind cut through the thin fabric of his gloves, biting at his fingers. Snow swirled in spirals around them, reflecting the beams of his flashlight like tiny stars. It was silent, too silent. Daniel approached the porch, flashlight sweeping across rotting wood and broken shingles. Then he noticed something strange, tracks in the snow. Footprints, partially covered but visible enough to tell someone or two had been here recently. Their pattern wasn't erratic, it was deliberate, a slow, dragging pace, as if whoever had walked here was exhausted, barely holding themselves upright. Rex stiffened beside him. The dog's instincts were on fire, nose twitching, ears forward, body rigid. Daniel followed Rex's gaze to the edge of the porch, where the snow had been disturbed more than the rest. Something lay beneath the thin layer of ice and snow. A muffled sound reached Daniel's ears, barely audible, like a cough, a whisper, or maybe just the wind. But Rex's reaction confirmed it. It wasn't the wind. "Stay back," Daniel whispered, keeping his voice low, heart hammering. He crouched, moving closer to the disturbance. Snow crunched under his boots, each sound amplified in the eerie silence. Rex growled again, low and urgent, signaling that whatever was beneath the porch was in danger, weak, perhaps on the brink. Daniel reached down and shifted some broken boards aside. At first, all he saw was a flash of color, faded clothing torn and soaked, and a pair of hands gnarled and pale. Then he saw their faces partially buried in snow. His breath caught. An elderly man and woman, bundled in tattered coats, shaking violently, blue-tinged lips chattering. Their eyes, wide with fear and confusion, locked onto Daniel. "Oh my God," Daniel breathed. "Oh my God, hang on, we've got you." The woman coughed, a wet, desperate sound, and whispered something so faint he had to lean close to hear. We didn't know anyone would come." Rex pressed his body closer to them, resting his warm, solid weight against their shivering frames. The dog's presence was calming, a living barrier between the cold and their failing bodies. Daniel could see the shivers ripple through their frail limbs, their teeth chattering violently. The snow continued to fall around them, each flake a reminder that time was slipping away, that they had already endured too much. Daniel fumbled for his radio, voice tight. "Dispatch. I've found two elderly individuals, hypothermia suspected, abandoned at the Maplewood farmhouse. I need EMS immediately." Static replied, the delay in response stretching painfully long. Snow blew into Daniel's face, and the farmhouse loomed behind him like a monument to neglect, to human cruelty. He realized, stomach twisting, that someone had left them here, deliberately on Christmas Eve. The thought made his blood boil. He turned back to the couple, kneeling beside them, seeing the fear in their eyes deepen as they realized the cold wasn't going to wait. Rex nuzzled the woman's hand, whining softly. Daniel placed his own gloved hand over hers, offering warmth that barely touched the surface. Minutes passed, or were they seconds? He couldn't tell anymore. The couple murmured faintly, their words broken, disconnected. The man's hand twitched toward Rex, grasping for the warmth that only a dog could provide. Daniel's chest tightened. "Hold on, help is coming. Just hold on," he said, though even he wasn't sure if it was true. Rex, sensing the urgency, stood tail low, eyes darting between Daniel, the couple, and the tree line beyond the farmhouse. He barked sharply, then growled, circling as if trying to draw Daniel's attention. Daniel followed Rex's lead. His flashlight caught a shadow moving near the back of the property, another hint that this was no accident. Someone had brought them here, someone had left them, and perhaps they were still nearby. Daniel's pulse quickened. He reached for his radio again, repeating his call for backup and medics. The static hissed back. The couple huddled closer, clinging to Rex, their small breaths misting in the cold air. Their eyes searched Daniel's face, silently begging for reassurance. Daniel swallowed hard. He had faced danger before, crime scenes, armed suspects, violent confrontations, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so personal, so heartbreaking. This was Christmas Eve, a night meant for warmth, for family. And here were two lives dangling in the snow, abandoned by someone who should have cared. Rex let out a low whine, nudging Daniel insistently. He followed the dog to the edge of the porch, where a faint path disappeared into the dark woods. Daniel froze. The dog had picked up a scent, an echo of human presence, maybe a clue, maybe a threat. He realized then that they weren't completely alone. Someone might be watching. Someone who had left them here might still be near, and with the couple so weak, any confrontation could be catastrophic. Daniel's flashlight flickered as he surveyed the property, every shadow a possible danger. The snowstorm muffled sound but carried scent. Rex's hackles were raised, ears twitching at invisible movements. The night pressed in, cold and dark, and Daniel understood this. The hours ahead would test more than their survival. They would test courage, instincts, and trust in a partner whose loyalty went beyond the human mind. Then the woman whispered again, her voice barely audible. "They said no one would come." Daniel's heart sank, and Rex growled, low and warning, as the realization hit. This was deliberate. Someone had abandoned them, assuming the world would ignore their plight. And now, in the darkest, coldest hour, a police dog and a weary officer were all that stood between life and death. Daniel tightened his grip on Rex's leash, knelt closer to the couple, and whispered, "Not tonight, not on my watch." Rex pressed his warm body fully against the couple, refusing to move. And in that moment, Daniel understood. His partner wasn't just following orders. He was making a choice that could save lives or cost him everything. The night stretched on, silent except for the wind, the snow, and the soft, steady breathing of a dog refusing to abandon the helpless. Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Christmas Eve would never be the same again. The cold gnawed at Daniel Reeves as he crouched beside the elderly couple. Snowflakes fell in soft, silent patterns, covering the shattered boards and broken footsteps, but they could not hide the faint signs of life, or death, that lay beneath. Rex pressed his body against them, warm and unwavering, as if his presence alone could stop the freeze from claiming their fragile forms. Daniel's hands trembled, partly from the cold and partly from the enormity of the situation. These were lives on the edge, and he had arrived just in time, or maybe too late. He checked the man first. His pulse was faint, almost imperceptible, and his lips were tinged a pale blue. The woman, smaller, frailer, huddled beneath the weight of her husband's arm, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Their clothing was soaked, frozen, and inadequate against the merciless December night. The snow clung to their hair and eyelashes, glittering like tiny crystals in the flashlight beam. Daniel knew that hypothermia could claim them within minutes he didn't have. Rex whimpered softly and nudged the woman's arm with his nose. She startled at first, then relaxed slightly, instinctively leaning into his warmth. Daniel watched the small act of comfort and thought about the harsh irony. A dog, trained for obedience, was now acting as their protector, their heater, their lifeline. He couldn't let them die tonight, not on Christmas Eve. Daniel pulled off his coat and draped it over the couple, layering his own warmth with what little they had. "Hang in there," he said, voice hoarse. "Help is on the way. You're not alone anymore." The woman's eyes, glassy and fearful, flicked to Daniel. They said no one would come," she murmured again. Her words carried a weight Daniel felt in his chest, abandonment by family, by the world, by hope itself. He swallowed hard. "They were wrong," he said. "I'm here, and Rex is too. You're not going to die tonight." Rex shifted slightly, growling low at the edge of the woods. Daniel followed the dog's gaze and saw movement, subtle, fleeting, almost imperceptible. A shadow flitted between the trees, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Daniel's pulse spiked. Whoever had abandoned the couple could still be nearby, watching, waiting, or worse. The officer tightened his grip on his flashlight and radio, ready for confrontation, but he had to act fast. The couple's condition was deteriorating. Daniel gently lifted the man's head and felt the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "Come on, buddy, stay with me," he whispered. He could see the faint frost forming along the man's eyelashes and the woman's hair, tiny white crystals marking how long they had been exposed to the bitter night. It was clear they had been left to die, and now the question was whether he could save them in time. Rex pressed closer to the man, nudging him repeatedly. The dog's behavior was precise, deliberate, almost instinctual, as if he understood the limits of human life in a way Daniel could not. Every time the man's pulse faltered, Rex nudged harder, using his body as a physical reminder to fight, to survive. Daniel glanced at the woman, noticing how her hands were frozen, fingers stiff and blue. He grabbed her gloves from his coat and helped her slip them on. Every motion had to be careful. The slightest jolt could trigger shock. Daniel checked his radio again, still static. The blizzard was worse than anticipated, roads treacherous and icy. He couldn't wait for paramedics to arrive. He had to act. He wrapped the couple tightly together, pressing them as close to his chest as possible, letting them share body heat. He knew it wasn't enough. They were on the brink, and time was slipping through his fingers like sand. Rex barked suddenly, low and urgent. Daniel froze. The dog was alert, staring toward the edge of the woods again, nose twitching, ears high. Daniel's flashlight followed the dog's line of sight, catching a flicker of movement, a set of footprints leading toward the back of the property, partially hidden by snowdrifts. They weren't recent, but they were fresh enough to suggest that someone had been here not long ago. Someone had brought them to this farmhouse. Someone had made the cruel decision to leave them to die. Daniel felt anger and fear collide in his chest. His hands were shaking, but he pushed it aside. "Rex, stay close," he said, but the dog refused to move. He remained pressed against the couple, almost guarding them from the shadows beyond. Daniel realized the dog had chosen his role tonight, not just a partner in law enforcement, but a guardian, a shield against the cold and the unknown. The couple's breathing was ragged. The man's pulse was weaker now, almost imperceptible. The woman leaned against Rex, whispering broken words of gratitude and fear. Daniel whispered back, trying to instill hope, though it was hard to believe. Then the woman's voice caught his attention. They left us. Why would anyone do this?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. There was no reason that could justify this cruelty, no explanation that could make the injustice bearable. He squeezed her hand and said, "Some people fail to care, but you're alive now, you're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." A sudden gust of wind blew through the broken windows of the farmhouse, carrying with it the sharp bite of winter. Snow swirled around Daniel, the couple, and Rex, forming a miniature blizzard that obscured vision. The flashlight's beam shook with each gust. Then through the storm Daniel heard it, a faint groan almost drowned out by the wind. He froze, listening intently. Rex stiffened as well, ears flat, low growl building in his throat. Daniel followed the sound, leading Rex to the source. Beneath a collapsed section of the porch partially covered by snow, he found something moving. It was faint, weak, a shadow of life. He reached down carefully and moved the snow aside. Underneath, he discovered a small tin box, the contents partially melted by frost. Inside were folded photographs, a few coins, and a torn note that made Daniel's stomach churn. It read in shaky handwriting, "They'll be gone soon. Nobody will check here. It's easier this way. Don't save them, let them fade." Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. This was deliberate, not negligence, not accident. Someone had abandoned them on purpose. The cruelty of it burned hotter than the wind ever could. Rex nudged the woman again, sensing the tension, sensing the danger, refusing to let the darkness take over. Daniel's radio crackled at last, faint through the static. "Unit 12, backup en route. ETA 5 minutes." 5 minutes, 5 long, endless minutes. He swallowed hard and looked at the couple. Their eyes met his, wide and trusting, fragile as snowflakes. "Hang on," he whispered. 5 minutes, that's all it takes." Rex growled again, low and insistent, turning toward the woods. Something, or someone, was out there, watching. Daniel felt his pulse race. He had rescued them from death by cold, but now the threat of whoever had abandoned them loomed closer than ever. And then the woman, shivering violently, murmured something that made Daniel freeze. They said no one would come." Her words echoed in the night, a haunting reminder that even now, with rescue moments away, the world was a cruel place. Daniel tightened his grip on Rex's leash, heart pounding, and whispered, "No, not tonight, not on my watch." The night was silent again, snow falling, shadows shifting. But one thing was clear. Someone had brought them here, someone who thought no one would interfere. And Daniel knew, before help arrived, the next moments could decide whether the couple would live or die. Rex pressed closer, warm and steadfast, refusing to let go. And Daniel realized with a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. This dog was no longer just a partner. He was their lifeline. And if he failed, everyone would pay the price. The wind howled through the broken windows of the farmhouse like a chorus of ghosts, scattering snow across the porch and swirls of frost across Daniel Reeves' flashlight beam. The elderly couple shivered violently, huddled against the cold, their fragile bodies trembling as if the winter itself had taken residence inside their bones. Daniel wrapped his arms around them as best he could, pressing his own warmth into theirs. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. Hypothermia was cruel, relentless, and unforgiving, and he could feel the icy fingers of death brushing closer with each passing second. Rex, steadfast as ever, lay across their legs, body a barrier against the cold. His fur, thick and warm, radiated a comforting heat, and the dog's deep, steady breathing offered a rhythm that seemed almost human. Daniel watched the dog's eyes, alert and piercing even in the dim light. Rex had a sense of urgency, a deep understanding that went beyond instinct. He wasn't just keeping them warm, he was holding onto life itself. Daniel's hands were numb despite his gloves. He pressed his fingers into the man's wrist, feeling a pulse that was faint, irregular, sometimes fading into nothingness. The woman's lips were blue and her teeth chattered uncontrollably, each vibration breaking Daniel's heart a little more. "You're okay," he whispered, though he could barely believe it. "You're still here, just hang on, help is coming." Her frail hand reached out, trembling, and grazed Rex's head. The dog pressed closer, nuzzling her palm, and the woman's lips curved into the faintest semblance of a smile. Her eyes, though clouded with fear, found Daniel. They said no one would come," she whispered again. Her voice was a broken thread of disbelief and hope, a delicate line between despair and salvation. Daniel's chest tightened. The cruelty of humanity had never felt so sharp, so personal. He leaned closer. "They were wrong," he said, voice cracking. "You're not alone now, I'm here. Rex is here. You're going to make it through tonight." Rex growled low, a sound that vibrated through the porch and seemed to make the shadows shiver. Daniel turned toward the edge of the woods. A faint movement caught his eye, shapes darting among the snow-laden trees. The footprints from earlier were partially obscured, but the dog's gaze was fixed. Someone had been here. Someone might still be watching. The thought sent a jolt of fear through Daniel's veins. He wasn't just fighting time or cold now. He might be facing a person who intended harm. The man coughed violently, a wet, rattling sound that made Daniel flinch. His pulse flickered again, fading to near nothing. Daniel's stomach dropped. He reached for his radio, voice tense. "Dispatch, EMS, now, the couple's condition is critical. We need immediate assistance, hypothermia cases." Static. The radio only crackled back. Snow blew harder across the broken boards. The farmhouse moaned under the weight of the storm. Daniel realized he couldn't wait. Every second without medical attention could be the difference between life and death. He pressed his coat tighter around them, trying to transfer warmth, and prayed it would be enough. Rex whined softly, sensing Daniel's tension, nudging the man's shoulder. The dog's body vibrated with quiet energy, a steady reminder that they weren't alone. Daniel traced the dog's gaze toward the edge of the property again. A shadow moved, a flicker of motion in the trees. It wasn't clear if it was a person or just the wind, but Daniel's instincts screamed danger. He adjusted his grip on Rex's leash and flashlight, heart racing. Whoever had left the couple here might still be nearby. The woman's voice trembled. Do you think they'll come back?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't know," he admitted, voice low, "but we're not waiting for them. We'll get through this." He checked the man again. His pulse had slowed further. Shivering violently, his eyes flickered, threatening to close. Daniel's stomach twisted with fear. "Rex," he said, voice barely audible, "stay with him. Don't leave him alone." The dog shifted, pressing his full body against the man's chest, heat transferring like a silent vow of protection. Daniel couldn't help but marvel at the instinct, the loyalty, the raw courage in that animal. Rex was more than a partner. He was a savior and the couple's only chance tonight. The snow intensified, blowing in thick curtains that obscured the edges of the porch. Daniel squinted, seeing only the faint outlines of the decaying farmhouse and the glinting white of the storm. Time stretched like taffy, each second dragging heavier than the last. He wished, prayed for the sound of sirens, for any sign that help was close. Then he heard it, a distant rumble muffled by the storm but unmistakable. Tires crunching on snow, a vehicle approaching. Daniel's heart leapt. EMS. Relief surged through him, quickly replaced by panic. The couple was fatting fast. He adjusted their positions, keeping them close, coaxing their bodies to hold on. The man's eyes fluttered open, barely conscious. "Cold," he rasped, voice barely more than a whisper. "So cold." Daniel leaned in. I know, just hold on, you're safe now. Rex won't let anything happen to you." The woman sobbed quietly, burying her face in the dog's fur. Thank you," she murmured. Rex growled sharply, ears forward, nose twitching toward the edge of the woods again. Daniel froze. The dog had picked up a scent, something alive. Someone was out there. Daniel's pulse spiked. He reached for his flashlight and swept the beam toward the trees. A figure darted, quick and silent, moving between shadows. Daniel's mind raced. Could it be the person who had abandoned them, or someone else entirely? Either way, he couldn't ignore it. He adjusted his grip on Rex's leash. "Stay," he whispered to the dog, though the Malinois' body was taut, ready to spring. Then the man's hand twitched weakly toward Rex. He grasped the dog's fur, clinging for warmth, for life itself. The woman mirrored the gesture, placing a trembling hand on Rex's head. The dog leaned into both, pressing them together, body a barrier against cold, fear, and death. Daniel exhaled shakily. He was witnessing something extraordinary, a bond between human and animal, raw and unspoken, a thread of hope in the middle of despair. Yet the shadow in the woods remained. distant but unnerving, a reminder that danger had not disappeared. Finally, headlights cut through the storm. Daniel's voice cracked with relief. "Here, EMS, over here." The sirens were muffled by snow, but the vehicle appeared, skidding slightly on the icy road. Paramedics leapt out, blankets and medical gear in hand. Daniel moved aside, letting them work, but his eyes never left Rex. The dog still stood between the couple and the darkness, unwavering, alert to every sound, every movement. The paramedics lifted the man onto a stretcher first, securing him tightly. Then the woman. Daniel helped guide Rex back slightly, but the dog's gaze never left the couple. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. This dog had gone beyond duty, beyond instinct. He had chosen to protect these lives at any cost. As the couple was carried toward the ambulance, the woman's hand waved weakly. "Thank you, Rex," she whispered, tears glistening on her cheeks. Rex gave a low, satisfied whine, his tail thumping weakly against the snow. But Daniel noticed his body trembling, not from cold, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He had given everything. The dog had absorbed the cold, absorbed the danger, absorbed the fear so the couple could survive. Daniel knelt beside Rex, gripping his collar. "Good job, boy," he said softly. "You saved them, but you need to rest now." Rex leaned against him, eyes closing briefly, as if acknowledging the promise. But Daniel couldn't shake the unease that lingered. Someone had left these people to die, and that shadow in the woods hadn't disappeared entirely. The night wasn't over, not for the dog, not for Daniel, and certainly not for the story that was still unfolding. As the ambulance's lights faded into the storm, Daniel realized one chilling truth. Tonight had shown him the best and worst of humanity. Abandonment and cruelty, compassion and courage. And in the center of it all, a dog who refused to let the darkness win. But as he watched the taillights disappear, a whisper of movement in the trees caught his eye. Someone or something was still out there. And Daniel knew deep down the next choice could determine more than survival. The storm had not let up. Snow whipped across the farmhouse like shards of glass, piling high against the porch, swirling around Daniel Reeves' boots and icing the edges of Rex's fur. The night felt infinite, stretching in a silence that was both heavy and terrifying. Every passing second seemed measured in heartbeats, each one a reminder that time was running out. Hypothermia was patient, relentless, and it didn't care that tonight was Christmas Eve. Daniel knew the couple's fragile bodies were giving up, and he had to hold the line until help arrived. Rex lay across the couple, his warm, solid weight pressing into them like a shield against the cold. The dog's head rested on the man's chest, eyes bright, ears twitching at every sound. He was calm yet alert, a living barrier against both the winter and the unknown threats lurking beyond the tree line. Daniel watched, awestruck and anxious, as the dog's instincts carried him beyond any training, beyond any expectation. Rex understood something Daniel could only feel. Life was fragile, and he alone could anchor it tonight. Daniel wrapped the couple tightly in his coat, pressing their bodies together, trying to create a cocoon of warmth. His gloves were wet, his arms stiff from cold, but he refused to let go. He whispered encouragements into the darkness, his voice cracking. "Hold on, don't give up. Help is coming, you're going to be okay." The words felt fragile, like glass in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway, desperate for them to matter. The woman stirred slightly, leaning into Rex's side, murmuring incomprehensible words. Daniel bent closer. "It's okay," he whispered. "Rex is here, I'm here, you're safe." Her lips trembled into a faint smile, fleeting as the snowflakes swirling around them. But her pulse was erratic, weak, fading with each shallow breath. Daniel's stomach twisted. He couldn't lose them, not tonight. Then from the edge of the property came a sound. Faint at first, a crunch of snow under boots, the whisper of movement but distinct. Rex lifted his head, growl low, throat vibrating with warning. Daniel's pulse spiked. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness, voice steady despite the terror crawling up his spine. No reply. Only the storm answered, howling through broken windows and battered boards. Rex sprang to his feet suddenly, barking sharply, and darted a few steps toward the tree line. Daniel's heart lurched. The dog wasn't disobeying, he was alerting them, warning them. Daniel followed cautiously, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. Shadows twisted in the trees, fleeting and unpredictable. A figure moved, a flash of dark clothing against the white snow, but before Daniel could react, it vanished. He returned to the couple, heart hammering. The man's pulse had slowed further. His breathing was shallow, labored, and the tremors of the cold shook him violently. Daniel pressed his hand against his chest, willing warmth into his frail body. "Stay with me, come on, you can do this," he whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. Rex nudged the woman's shoulder, encouraging her, keeping her awake. The dog's body trembled slightly, exhaustion, fatigue, but he didn't leave them. Not for a second. Daniel marveled at the loyalty, the bravery, the raw instinct that kept the animal in place despite the merciless cold. Minutes dragged like hours. Each second stretched unbearably, a measure of life and death balanced on the edge of a knife. Daniel checked his radio again, still static. EMS was stuck somewhere, delayed by ice and snow. He had to keep the couple alive until help arrived. He had to. The woman whispered again, almost inaudibly. I thought we'd die alone." Her voice cracked. Daniel swallowed hard. The cruelty they had endured was unimaginable. Abandoned, left to die, told no one would care. And yet here he and Rex had arrived, fragile lifelines in the frozen night. Rex pressed his body fully against them now, transferring heat, steadying what was left of their weakening pulses. Daniel felt his own resolve harden. He could not fail them. Not now, not tonight. He held them as best he could, shifting his body to shield them from the wind and cold. Every time the man's pulse faltered, Rex nudged him again, insistent, reminding him to fight to survive. Then came the faintest whimper, not from the couple, from Rex. He stood suddenly, tail low, ears forward, barking sharply toward the road. Daniel froze. The dog wasn't panicking, he was signaling. He bolted, moving with precision across the snow toward the distant glow of headlights. Daniel's stomach lurched. What was Rex doing? Seconds later, the headlights came into view, a pickup truck, headlights cutting through the snowstorm. Daniel realized what Rex had done. He had gone to fetch help himself. The dog, exhausted, nearly collapsing under the weight of the night's exertion, had run straight into danger to ensure the couple's survival. The realization brought tears to Daniel's eyes. Rex wasn't just loyal, he was heroic beyond measure. Daniel lifted the couple as best he could, adjusting their positions while the dog led the truck closer. The paramedics jumped out, sliding through the ice and snow, eyes wide with shock at the scene. Daniel explained quickly, voice tense, gesturing toward Rex. He saved them. He's been keeping them alive in the snow. They wouldn't have lasted another minute. The paramedics worked quickly, securing the man and woman onto stretchers, wrapping them in blankets. The woman's hand gripped Rex's fur one last time, whispering broken words of thanks. The man's lips trembled as he whispered, "Thank you, boy." Rex barked once, low and proud, then collapsed into the snow, exhaustion finally overtaking him. Daniel knelt beside him, pressing a hand against his trembling body. "You did it, buddy. You saved them, but now you rest." The storm continued to howl, relentless. The couple was being lifted into the warmth of the truck, leaving the abandoned farmhouse behind. Daniel's gaze swept the shadows once more. The figure he had seen in the trees was gone, vanished into the night, leaving a lingering sense of unease. Whoever had abandoned them hadn't been caught, but tonight Rex had made sure their lives were spared. Daniel stroked Rex's fur gently, heart heavy with gratitude and worry. This dog had risked everything, absorbed the cold, the danger, the night itself, so that human life could continue. He realized then, with a mix of awe and fear, that the night wasn't over, not yet. The story of abandonment, of cruelty, of loyalty and bravery had more chapters to unfold. And somewhere in the woods, a shadow watched, silent and unseen. The storm raged on, snow piling against broken boards, drifting into corners where life and death had danced. Daniel felt the weight of the night pressing down, knowing that while Rex had saved lives, the darkness hadn't fully released its grip. He leaned against the porch, eyes on the retreating truck. "We're not done yet," he whispered. Rex's head lifted slightly, tail thumping weakly, as if acknowledging the unspoken truth. Their mission was far from over. Someone had left them to die, and somewhere out there, the story of cruelty was still unfolding. The night stretched on, snow falling silently, and Daniel knew one thing. He, Rex, and the lives they had saved tonight were bound together now. The choices they made in the next moments would decide far more than survival. The pickup truck's headlights cut a path through the blizzard, reflecting off the endless curtain of falling snow. Daniel Reeves guided the elderly couple carefully, stepping over ice-coated ruts, trying to maintain balance while supporting their frail frames. Every moment felt stretched, the world reduced to nothing but the crunch of tires on snow, the rasp of shallow breaths, and the steady, warm presence of Rex at their side. The dog had stayed with them as long as he could, but exhaustion was beginning to show, his paws sore, his muscles trembling under the weight of the night's ordeal. The couple's breaths were shallow and irregular. The man's lips had lost almost all color, and the woman's fingers were stiff, barely moving despite Daniel's efforts to warm them. Hypothermia had clawed deeper with each passing hour, stealing heat, strength, and consciousness. Daniel knew time was critical. They could survive, but only if the warmth and medical care were immediate. Rex, sensing the urgency, shifted his weight, nudging Daniel toward the approaching truck. But then he did something Daniel didn't expect. Without warning, Rex bolted ahead, ears flat, tail low, moving straight into the swirling storm. Daniel froze, heart pounding. The dog wasn't running away, he was leading them. But to where? He risked his own safety, disappearing into the blinding snow, moving like a shadow guided by instinct. "Rex," Daniel called, fear lacing his voice, but the dog didn't falter. He vanished into the whiteness, and then from the corner of Daniel's eye, headlights appeared, not from the truck they were heading toward, but from a vehicle coming up the narrow road, skidding slightly on the icy surface. Daniel's mind raced. Rex had done this before, acting on instinct rather than command. Was he leading the truck? Was this another rescue? Or had he sensed danger lurking nearby? Before Daniel could decide, the approaching truck screeched to a halt. The driver, eyes wide in confusion, jumped out, hands shielding his face from the blowing snow. Rex appeared moments later, panting, body tense but alert. He barked sharply, moving between the truck and the farmhouse, then back at Daniel. The driver's jaw dropped as he realized the urgency. Rex was guiding them, forcing the vehicle closer, acting as a living beacon in the storm. Daniel moved quickly, lifting the couple gently and guiding them toward the truck. The driver, a young man bundled in a heavy coat, took them immediately, wrapping them in thick blankets. Daniel helped lift the man onto the truck bed first, then the woman, their frailty a stark reminder of the hours they had endured. But when he turned toward Rex, the dog remained in the snow, standing rigid, tail low, eyes locked on the couple. Daniel's stomach twisted. "Come on, Rex," he said softly, "get in." Rex hesitated, then bolstered his stance, refusing to budge. He had delivered help, ensured their survival, but now he chose to stay behind. Daniel knelt beside him, heart heavy, realizing what the dog had done. Rex had given everything he had to keep the couple alive, his warmth, his energy, his focus. And now, even as rescue arrived, he refused to abandon them until they were truly safe. The driver glanced at Daniel. "Is he okay?" Daniel shook his head, voice low. "Exhausted. He's been out here all night in the snow, keeping them alive. But he's remarkable." Rex shifted slightly, trembling in the cold. Daniel pressed his hands to his sides, offering warmth, whispering reassurances. "You did it, boy. You saved them. You've done everything you could." Meanwhile, the elderly couple, bundled in blankets, looked at Rex with wide, tear-filled eyes. The woman's lips trembled. He stayed," she whispered. "He didn't leave us." The man nodded weakly, gripping the blanket around his shoulders. "Rex, our guardian." Their gratitude, raw and unfiltered, pressed heavily on Daniel's chest. But even as the ambulance's sirens approached and paramedics prepared to lift them into the warmth, Daniel couldn't shake the lingering fear. The storm raged, shadows lingered near the farmhouse, and someone had abandoned this couple intentionally. Whoever they were, they hadn't been caught, and the threat was still out there. Daniel gently stroked Rex's fur. "You can rest now, I've got them." The dog leaned into him, body trembling but eyes bright and aware. Daniel realized the magnitude of what Rex had done. He had absorbed the cold, the fear, the danger, and the weight of responsibility. He had made a choice, one that no human could force him to make, and in doing so, he had shifted the fate of these lives entirely. The ambulance pulled closer, lights cutting through the storm. Paramedics moved quickly, assessing the couple, placing them on stretchers and wheeling them toward the vehicle. The woman reached out, touching Rex's head one final time. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "You saved our lives." Rex gave a low whine, a sound Daniel recognized now as relief and acknowledgement, then lowered his head, paused digging into the snow as if rooting himself to the earth, refusing to abandon his post. Daniel knelt beside him, hand on his shoulder, voice barely above the howl of the wind. "It's over, buddy. You did it. You saved them. You've done everything." But the night was not yet done. Daniel's eyes caught movement in the woods, fleeting shadows that slipped between the snow-laden trees. He tensed, realizing the danger was still near. Whoever had left the couple here might still be watching, still waiting. And if the night had taught him anything, it was that danger didn't leave quietly. The storm intensified, winds whipping around the broken farmhouse. Daniel wrapped his arms around Rex, pressing warmth into the dog's shivering frame. "We'll face whatever comes," he whispered. "Together." The couple's cries of relief faded as they were lifted into the ambulance. Daniel watched, heart hammering as the doors closed, lights spinning, sirens fading into the night. He turned back to Rex, whose body trembled from exhaustion but whose eyes still held that piercing focus, that steadfast determination. "Tonight you chose to protect them," Daniel said softly, voice thick. "You gave everything and then some, but now it's time to rest." Rex let out a low, satisfied sigh, settling into the snow at Daniel's feet. The storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving, but for a moment there was peace. The couple had survived. The dog had chosen bravery over fear, loyalty over comfort, and in doing so had changed the course of their lives forever. Daniel knelt beside him, watching the snow swirl, the shadows shift, the world alive with danger and beauty all at once. "You're extraordinary, Rex," he whispered, "and this is just the beginning." Even as the night continued, even as the storm enveloped the farmhouse and the shadows lingered, one thing was undeniable. Rex had made a choice that night, an act of courage, loyalty, and love that would echo far beyond the frozen fields of Ohio. And Daniel knew, with every beat of his heart, that the story of that Christmas Eve was far from over. The ambulance barreled through the blizzard, tires cutting deep ruts into the ice-covered road. Inside, the elderly couple lay wrapped in thick blankets, their faces pale but alive, faint traces of color returning as the heaters hummed to life. Paramedics worked quickly, checking pulses, warming packs, and monitoring oxygen. Daniel Reeves sat in the passenger seat, exhausted, eyes flicking constantly between the couple and Rex, who was riding in the back of the truck bed alongside them. Rex's body pressed tightly against the blankets, his warm fur mingling with theirs, but Daniel immediately noticed the subtle tremors in his legs. The dog's head lifted occasionally, alert, scanning the shadows beyond the truck, but it was clear. Rex was severely exhausted. Every muscle ached from the hours of constant effort, the weight of keeping two lives alive in the snow, the constant vigilance against unseen dangers. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized just how close Rex had come to collapse. The storm had not relented. Snow whipped against the windshield and truck cab, each gust slicing through the night like frozen knives. The rhythmic beat of the wipers was almost hypnotic, yet Daniel could not rest. The The couple murmured faint words of thanks, barely audible over the roar of the heater and the wind outside. They reached weak hands toward Rex, brushing his fur, whispering their gratitude. Thank you, the woman whispered, her lips trembling. You saved us. Rex responded with a low whine, lifting his head, eyes meeting Daniel's briefly, almost knowingly. Daniel could feel the depth of the bond formed in those perilous hours, a bond forged in desperation, cold, and courage. But the dog's trembling grew more pronounced. His breathing was ragged, shallow, and uneven. Every instinct in Daniel screamed that the real danger had shifted, from the cold that had threatened the couple to the sheer physical toll on Rex. Paramedics in the front exchanged concerned glances as Daniel leaned forward. He's exhausted, Daniel said softly. He's been out there all night. Hypothermia, overexertion. He needs a vet now. I don't think he can hold on much longer. The paramedic nodded, pulling a small blanket from the first aid kit and carefully draping it over Rex. But Daniel knew it wasn't enough. The dog had absorbed hours of cold, fear, and fatigue, sustaining not only his own body but transferring heat and energy to the couple. He had made a conscious choice, a heroic act of will that no human could replicate. And now, Daniel feared, that choice might cost him everything. Rex lifted his head briefly, ears twitching, eyes flicking toward the couple. Then he exhaled sharply, shifting slightly, resting his head against the man's chest once more. Daniel's throat tightened. You can rest after this, he whispered. You've done everything you could. You've saved them. The couple's hands moved feebly, brushing against Rex's fur, reinforcing the connection that had sustained them both. The woman's voice was a soft whisper. He didn't just save us. He stayed with us. Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead, overwhelmed. The storm outside seemed almost secondary compared to the magnitude of what had just occurred, the bravery of a dog who had risked his life, whose loyalty and instinct had triumphed over death itself. But as the truck continued its silent journey, the cold that Rex had absorbed began to take its toll. His body shivered uncontrollably now, and Daniel could feel the tremors radiating through the blankets, seeping into the couple's fragile warmth. The paramedic leaned back, voice tight. We need to get him checked immediately. This is severe overexertion. If we wait another minute, it could be critical. Daniel nodded grimly. I know, he said, tightening his grip on Rex's collar. Just a little longer. You can do it, buddy. You have to do it. Minutes dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. The ambulance lights were faint through the storm, and every shadow of a tree, every gust of wind, seemed amplified in Daniel's mind. The couple murmured faintly, occasionally reaching toward Rex, their gratitude and fear blending into a fragile symphony of human emotion. Daniel's own hands were numb from holding blankets, supporting limbs, and gripping the dog's collar. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears erect, as a faint sound reached him through the roar of the storm. Daniel followed the dog's gaze, heart hammering. In the snow behind a drift, a shadow moved, brief, fleeting, almost imperceptible. A figure, another threat, or a lingering vestige of the cruelty that had abandoned the couple in the first place. Daniel's breath hitched. He reached for his radio, ready to call it in, but the truck's engine drowned out static and signals alike. Rex's tail thumped once, softly, a signal of awareness, of readiness. The dog had done everything in his power to protect these lives, and now, even in exhaustion, he was alert to the faintest danger. The couple's eyes met Daniel's. He's incredible, the man whispered, voice weak. I don't know how we survived. Daniel swallowed, his own throat tight. He's extraordinary, he said, but he's more than that. He's your lifeline. The snowstorm intensified, visibility dropping to mere feet. The truck's tires squealed on ice, rocking slightly with each rut. Daniel kept his hands pressed against Rex, offering warmth, murmuring words of encouragement. Almost there, just hold on. Finally, a distant glow pierced the storm, a hospital sign, faint but unmistakable. Relief surged through Daniel's chest, but he knew the danger wasn't over. Rex had survived hours of extreme exertion, yet the last mile could push him past the breaking point. Daniel's heart pounded as he whispered to the dog, "You've done everything. You can make it these last few moments." The truck skidded to a halt outside the emergency entrance. Paramedics rushed to unload the couple first, wrapping them in warm blankets, calling for triage assistance. Daniel carefully lifted Rex, guiding him into a blanket, nodding the dog's trembling, shallow breaths. The hospital doors loomed ahead, promising warmth and safety, yet the uncertainty of Rex's condition weighed heavily on Daniel. He knelt beside the dog, pressing his hands against his side, murmuring reassurances. "You saved them, Rex. You kept them alive through the night. And now it's your turn. Let someone care for you." The vet team arrived quickly, taking Rex into the hospital, checking temperature, heart rate, and breathing. Daniel followed closely, stomach twisting as he watched the dog, once the fearless hero of the night, shiver violently under their care. The severity of his exhaustion, of his selfless effort, became terrifyingly clear. Minutes felt like hours as Daniel waited outside the emergency room, listening to muffled voices and the beeping of monitors. The elderly couple had already been whisked to recovery, their lives now firmly in the hands of trained professionals. But all Daniel could think about was Rex, the dog who had chosen loyalty over his own survival, whose courage had made the difference between life and death. Finally, the vet emerged, expression unreadable. Daniel's heart raced, bracing for the worst. "He's stable," the vet said, voice measured. "But barely. He's hypothermic and severely exhausted. He's lucky to be alive." Daniel exhaled, relief flooding through him, but guilt gnawed at the edges of that relief. "He gave everything," he said softly, "everything and more. He stayed with them, kept them alive all night." The vet nodded. "It's rare. Most dogs wouldn't survive that kind of exposure and exertion. He's extraordinary." Daniel knelt beside Rex's cage, stroking his trembling body, murmuring words of praise. The dog's eyes fluttered open briefly, catching Daniel's gaze. In that moment, everything of the night, the snow, the storm, the shadows, the danger, the terror, was distilled into a single, quiet truth. Rex had made a choice that had saved lives, and now he had survived that choice. But even as relief washed over Daniel, one truth lingered, unspoken and heavy. The cruelty that had abandoned the couple had not been confronted. The shadows from the farmhouse still lingered somewhere in the night, silent and watchful. And the story of that Christmas Eve of danger, heroism, and survival was far from finished. Rex shifted slightly, tail thumping weakly, a quiet acknowledgement of the lives he had saved. Daniel pressed his forehead to the dog's, whispering, "You did it, buddy. You made it. You really made it." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, a dog and a man, bound by the night's events, shared a moment of quiet triumph, survival against the impossible, loyalty beyond expectation, and the beginning of healing from a night that could have been their last. The first rays of dawn were pale and weak, barely cutting through the lingering snowstorm that had raged through the night. Inside the hospital, warmth radiated from every corner, a stark contrast to the frozen chaos outside. Daniel Reeves sat beside Rex's cage, watching the dog stir under the careful attention of the veterinary team. The Malinois' body had been stabilized, warmth restored, and fluids administered, but his eyes still held the weight of the night's ordeal, a quiet exhaustion that seemed far heavier than his physical fatigue. Rex lifted his head slowly, ears twitching as he recognized Daniel. The dog gave a soft whine, tail thumping weakly against the floor, a subtle acknowledgement of their bond that had been forged in snow, fear, and life-or-death moments. Daniel reached through the bars, stroking his fur gently, whispering, "You're safe now. You've done everything. You've saved them all, Rex. You can rest." Rex leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly, the faintest sigh of relief escaping him. The heroics of the night had cost him everything, but in that small hospital room, he finally had a chance to recover. Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability, rubbing his face against the dog's head, swallowing the lump in his throat that had grown heavier with each passing hour. Meanwhile, the elderly couple was awake, now in recovery rooms adjacent to the hospital ward. Their skin had regained some color, their lips no longer tinged with the blue of hypothermia, but the trauma of abandonment remained visible in their eyes. They had survived the impossible, but the emotional scars were raw and unhealed. Daniel had stayed with them, recounting the moments of courage, the way Rex had shielded them from the freezing cold, the instinct that had guided the dog to fetch help. The woman, frail but resolute, grasped Daniel's hand with surprising strength. "I don't know how to thank you or him," she whispered, eyes glistening with tears. He stayed with us. All night, he wouldn't leave." The man, still weak from exposure, nodded slowly. "I've never seen loyalty like that, not in a person, not in a dog. He's extraordinary." Daniel swallowed, voice heavy. "He's more than extraordinary, he's selfless. He made a choice that kept you alive when no one else would. He stayed, even when he was exhausted, even when it could have cost him his life." Their hands remained intertwined with Rex's fur through the bars, a quiet, unspoken gratitude bridging the bond between human and animal. The room was filled with a silence that was both fragile and profound, a pause in the chaos of a night that had pushed everyone to the edge of despair. Outside, snow continued to fall, though now with the gentleness of morning rather than the fury of a blizzard. Daniel stepped to the window, peering at the broken farmhouse in the distance, still obscured by snowdrifts and shadows. The lingering darkness from the previous night seemed less threatening now, but he knew the storm had not fully passed. Someone had abandoned this couple, deliberately leaving them to die. Whoever it was, their cruelty had not yet been confronted. Rex's gaze followed Daniel's, ears twitching at every sound in the hospital corridor. Though the dog was stable, his instincts remained alert. The shadows of the previous night had left their mark, and Daniel could feel the tension lingering in the Malinois, a quiet wariness that refused to fade. Later, when the couple was deemed stable enough to leave, Daniel guided them carefully to the hospital's entrance. Outside, the snow had settled into a silent, sparkling blanket over the land, the aftermath of a storm that had tested courage, loyalty, and endurance. Rex, now partially recovered, trotted beside Daniel, leash held loosely, tail wagging faintly but eyes scanning the distance. He was no longer in immediate danger, but the memories of the night were still etched in every movement, every glance. The couple paused, gazing at Rex with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The woman knelt slightly, brushing snow from the dog's fur, tears spilling freely. You saved us," she whispered. "I can never thank you enough." The man placed a trembling hand on Rex's head, voice breaking. "You were our guardian, our angel in fur." Rex tilted his head, ears alert, eyes bright despite exhaustion, as if acknowledging their words but silently saying, "I did what I had to do." Daniel watched, heart full and heavy all at once, realizing that this dog had carried not just bodies through the storm, but the weight of trust, hope, and life itself. But even as relief washed over him, Daniel couldn't shake the unease that lingered. Whoever had abandoned the couple was still out there, their cruelty unresolved. The shadows of the night had not vanished, they had only retreated, and in the calm after the storm, the tension remained, subtle but insistent. That evening back at the hospital, Daniel sat beside Rex again. The dog's breathing was slower now, more rhythmic, but his body was still stiff, muscles aching from the night's ordeal. Daniel whispered softly, recounting every heroic act, every moment the dog had chosen to risk himself for others. "You kept them alive, buddy. You were more than a partner, more than a friend, you were their guardian. And now, you can finally rest." Rex leaned into him, eyes half closed, finally allowing himself to relax, though the wariness never fully left him. Daniel could feel the depth of the night's events etched into the dog's very being, a silent reminder of bravery, loyalty, and sacrifice. In the quiet moments that followed, Daniel reflected on the night's events, the cruelty that had left the couple abandoned, the danger that had lurked unseen, the courage that had saved them, and the loyalty that had carried the day. He knew that life was fragile, often cruel, but moments like these reminded him that hope, bravery, and love could still prevail in the darkest hours. And yet, as he looked out the window at the slowly fatting snow, one shadow lingered in his mind. The person, or people, responsible for abandoning the couple had not yet been found. Justice had not yet been served. And Daniel knew that for all the relief and gratitude of the morning, the story was far from over. Rex shifted slightly, resting his head against Daniel's arm. The dog's eyes were bright, alert, and watchful even in rest. The bond forged that night was unbreakable, and Daniel understood now more than ever that the courage of one dog had changed the course of human lives forever. But somewhere beyond the hospital walls, in the quiet of the snow-covered night, the shadows of cruelty remained. And the story, Daniel knew, would demand a reckoning, one that would bring closure not just to the couple, but to the night itself. The snow had stopped, leaving the world outside a pristine blanket of white, sparkling under the pale morning sun. It was a quiet contrast to the chaos and terror of the night before, as if the storm had taken with it the fear, leaving only the fragile peace of survival. But inside Daniel Reeves' mind, the events of Christmas Eve refused to fade. He knew the story was not yet complete. The elderly couple had been saved, yes, but someone had abandoned them, and that cruelty had to be confronted. Rex lay in a blanket on the hospital floor, eyes half closed, breathing steady but shallow. Daniel knelt beside him, brushing his fur gently, whispering words of praise. "You're the bravest dog I've ever met," he murmured. "You saved lives, Rex, and you survived. That's more than anyone could ask for." The couple, now dressed warmly, were slowly making their way out of the hospital room. Their faces, still marked by the night's ordeal, shone with gratitude and relief. The woman grasped Rex's paw, her eyes brimming with tears. "He's not just a dog," she whispered. "He's our guardian angel. He stayed with us through everything." The man nodded, voice trembling. "If it weren't for him, we wouldn't be here. Not now, not ever. He gave us life." Daniel watched, heart heavy, as Rex lifted his head, ears alert, tail wagging faintly. The dog seemed to understand the magnitude of their gratitude but remained cautious, scanning the windows and shadows. He had survived the storm, saved the couple, and endured extreme exhaustion, but the instincts that had kept him alive and kept the couple alive were still alive, alert and unwavering. The peaceful morning, however, was interrupted by the distant wail of sirens. Daniel turned toward the sound, his pulse quickening. Within moments, police vehicles arrived outside the hospital, officers rushing in with notebooks, cameras, and urgency. Daniel approached them, recounting the story in rapid, breathless words. The abandoned couple, the storm, the unknown person responsible, and of course, Rex, the dog whose courage had made all the difference. The police listened intently, their faces tight with concern and resolve. "We'll investigate immediately," one officer said, voice firm. "If someone left this couple to die, we're going to find them. That's a serious crime, endangerment, neglect, possibly attempted murder." Daniel nodded, glancing down at Rex. The dog's ears twitched at the officers' voices, a quiet awareness that action was being taken, that justice might follow. Rex had already saved lives, but Daniel knew the dog's heroic night deserved more than survival. It deserved closure. The police began taking statements from the couple, documenting the scene at the farmhouse, and reviewing any surveillance footage from nearby areas. Daniel helped the couple recount every detail they could remember: the dark figure moving in the woods, the cold, the terror, and Rex's heroic interventions. Each word carried weight, forming the foundation of a case that could finally bring justice. Meanwhile, Rex rested quietly, though every so often he would lift his head, ears twitching at the sound of snowplows outside or footsteps in the hall. His body had recovered slightly from the hypothermia and exhaustion, but the memories of the night were still vivid, etched into his instincts. Daniel could see it in his eyes, the awareness that life could be fragile, danger could lurk unseen, and courage could mean the difference between life and death. Hours later, detectives arrived with news. They had traced footprints, examined security cameras, and followed leads from neighbors who had reported suspicious activity. The investigation pointed to a local man known for previous petty crimes, someone who had recently expressed resentment toward the elderly couple over a land dispute. The man had abandoned them deliberately, leaving them in the storm with no way to survive. Daniel listened, jaw tight, heart hammering. "And Rex?" he asked, voice tense. "Does he know?" One of the detectives smiled faintly. "He doesn't need to know, but his actions are already part of the official report. That dog saved lives and his courage will be documented. The man will be held accountable." The couple standing nearby gasped in relief and gratitude. The woman clutched Daniel's arm. He can finally rest knowing they'll be punished," she whispered. "He saved us, and now they can't hurt anyone else like that." Rex, sensing the shift in tension, wagged his tail faintly, ears twitching. His duty was done. The immediate danger had passed. Justice was on its way. And for the first time since the storm began, the dog allowed himself to relax fully, laying his head on Daniel's lap. Outside, the first glimmers of sunlight reflected off the snow-covered trees. The world seemed alive again, filled with possibility. Daniel reflected on the night's events, the cruelty of abandonment, the threat of the storm, the danger lurking in shadows, and the miraculous courage of a dog who refused to leave two strangers to die. The night had tested humanity, both its worst and its best, and Rex had emerged as a symbol of hope, loyalty, and courage. Later that afternoon, the elderly couple returned to Daniel's home, accompanied by hospital staff, their spirits brighter now. They wanted to see Rex outside the hospital, to thank him personally and witness the life that had been saved because of his courage. Rex bounded forward cautiously, then relaxed, sensing the couple's warmth and gratitude. He nudged the man gently, then the woman, tail wagging faintly as they knelt to embrace him. "You're our miracle," the man said softly, pressing his cheek against Rex's fur. "Our guardian angel." The woman's eyes brimmed with tears. "We survived because of you and because of him," she said, glancing at Daniel. "We will never forget this Christmas, ever." Daniel knelt beside Rex, brushing his fur gently. "You've earned more than praise," he said softly. "You've earned a life of comfort, love, and respect, and I promise we'll make sure you get it." That evening, as the sun set behind the snow-covered fields, Daniel, Rex, and the couple stood together, gazing at the quiet world. The storm had passed, the immediate danger was gone, and justice was on its way. But the night's events had left an indelible mark. The courage of one dog had altered lives, saved two humans from death, and reminded all of them that loyalty, bravery, and love could shine brightest in the darkest hours. In the weeks that followed, the man responsible for abandoning the couple was arrested, tried, and convicted. The story of that Christmas Eve spread across local news, capturing hearts everywhere. Rex became a local hero, recognized not just for his actions, but for the spirit of unwavering courage he had shown. Plaques, awards, and community recognition followed, but for Daniel and the couple, the real reward was the life they had been given. Rex, now healthy and calm, rested beside Daniel's fireplace, the warmth of the room a comfort after the horrors of the storm. The elderly couple visited often, bringing treats, love, and endless gratitude. And though the memories of that night remained vivid, they were now accompanied by hope, safety, and the certainty that bravery, no matter how small or in this case four-legged, could change everything. As Christmas lights twinkled outside the window, Daniel whispered to Rex, "You saved them and you saved me too, in a way. You showed us all what courage looks like." Rex lifted his head, tail thumping softly, eyes bright but serene. The storm had passed, the shadows had been confronted, and the hero of the night could finally rest, knowing that he had made the ultimate difference. And so, in the quiet warmth of that home, with snow glistening outside and hearts full of gratitude, the story of one dog, two lives, and the night that tested them all came to a close. A night of terror transformed into a tale of hope, courage, and justice, forever remembered, forever celebrated.